So this is a fantastic opportunity to talk about what Export Development Canada does, because it's more timely than ever. And here at Canada West Foundation, we try our very best to bring you the most important things that are relevant to your interests and the interests of Western Canada, and we try and do it in a timely way. And so I want to, first of all, thank Export Development Canada for this partnership. I want to thank the University of Saskatchewan. I think you'll all agree that the SaskU hub here is a terrific facility. I invite you to take a look at the books that are on the shelf there. They're books that are written by University of Saskatchewan faculty and alumni, and maybe I've written a forward note in one or two of those books there. So I invite you to take a look at those. I want to acknowledge, first of all, and thank all of you for coming out today. And we have a broad range of people. Alison was asking me this morning, who's in attendance? Well, I mean, we've got C-suite people, we've got exporters in the room, we've got people from the academic community, we've got people from consular missions from, I see Finland and the People's Republic of China, the Philippines. I think I saw somebody from the United Kingdom. I thank you for coming. We've invited MLAs and government people, people that are both elected and in the bureaucracies of the government of Alberta, and people, I think, from Calgary Economic Development. So you've got a really great audience that's here to see you, Alison. So look, I've known Alison for, I don't know, about 12 years, 13 years? Is that about right? Okay, we have to use our microphones to get recorded. Yeah,
absolutely.
So, so we met when I was posted in Hong Kong, and the first time we ever met was at the fish bar at the JW Marriott, I think, right?
We won't go into further details after that.
So, I think you're going to be really impressed with what you hear from Alison, because, in a sense, I mean, this is a lengthy description of all the things that you've done, but I think the most notable thing here is you started your life with EDC.
Yeah.
And you spent a lot of time thinking about the issues that exporters have and how you can connect them with opportunities that are abroad, how you de-risk those opportunities. But you did say, here in Western Canada, you're not particularly as well known as you think you ought to be.
That's right.
So that's why we're really, really happy to have you here today. So let's start off. I've got some questions that I want to ask Alison, but I've also taken questions from audience members who've sent them in, and we'll get to those as well. And I'll also give you this opportunity for anybody that wants, and I do this all the time. If you have a question and you didn't submit it earlier, I'll pick it up on my cell phone. All right, and I'll get through as many of them as we can. So let's start off with something really pretty basic. I mean, what is the role of EDC?
Okay, well, thank you, Gary, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I think it's good we have a chance to actually talk about what is EDC in this market, because as I said, it really is, we're not as well known as we should be, and some of that is because, we are officially Canada's export credit agency, and that means we're largely dealing with companies who are doing business abroad. They might be exporting, they might be investing abroad, they might have partnerships. And so if you think about the roles of the different Crown corporations, where EDC's role is to help really Canadian companies of all sizes and shapes engage in international trade, be able to respond to international business opportunities, and use the range of financial products it has to make that ability to grow their exports, to grow their engagement in international markets more successful. So that includes quite a wide range of somewhat esoteric products that's why a lot of people don't understand. We have export credit insurance, we do bonding to help companies who have to put up performance bonds or bid bonds. We do guarantee programs with the bank so that if an exporter is having to use its lines of credit to fulfill a contract overseas, our support to the bank will allow them to have more working capital to do that, to fulfill that contract. We also do direct lending, and we do quite a lot of structured project finance. And so internationally, we actually have in Canada the largest project finance team in the country. It's just most of our work traditionally has been using those financing capabilities to do projects in support of Canadian companies who are going abroad. Maybe they're working on international energy projects, maybe they're working on international engineering or transportation projects. And so we would support the Canadian content that's going into an international project, right? So we follow our exporters, we follow our clients into the markets that they're going into. And that includes, by the way, support for Canadian direct investment abroad. So a Canadian company might be thinking of setting up overseas, and often Canadian banks don't feel comfortable taking that risk of supporting that because they say, well, I don't know anything about if you put a plant in Turkey about the security and jurisdiction there. So we'll step in and do that piece while not disturbing the Canadian bank's position of having senior security on the assets in Canada, right? So there's a whole lot of things we try to do to be complementary with our success being really made by having Canada much more out in the world, having more Canadian companies export, and having more Canadian companies who are able to scale their business by getting out of Canada and even out of the US and into new markets, because that, we believe, is how you build a successful company. It's pretty hard to build a company of scale if you're not exporting. And so we're really there to kind of help you on that journey.
So, I mean, before we came in here, we were talking about a couple of examples that I want you to sort of are illustrative of what you're talking about. One is AGT out of Saskatchewan, and the other one is Cook Aquaculture. Could you give us a sort of a thought on those as case studies for two companies that have been very successful working with EDC?
Yeah, I think AGT, which of course is legendary in these parts, and also just an incredible founder in any case. And I think that's a really interesting example to start with, because in the case of AGT, we both help them in their insurance. So we provide them with significant export credit insurance, insurance against non-repayment by their foreign buyers. So what that does is with that insurance,
sorry, not everybody will be familiar with AGT and what it is that they sell.
So AGT is, as you know, one of Canada's largest, well, one of the world's largest pulse producers and manufacturers. And AGT has gone from both exporting out of Canada in pulses and peas and lentils and things to having a value-add processing side, but also to setting up operations in other jurisdictions. So we started off working with them on the insurance side, where we were just protecting them against non-payment by their foreign buyers, and to help them support their growth into new markets. So they've gone into now India, they have operations there, they have an operation in Turkey they've been working on. And so what we've tried to do with companies who have that kind of ambition like Murad has to build a very global company is to say, well, where do you need to go next? And how can we sit and think about how we can support you in that market, right? Maybe it's now financing to set up your new plant somewhere else. Maybe we need to do some bonding if you have to put up a performance bond, or structured project finance for something you're doing that's a bit off balance sheet. So that partnership with a globally minded company is really what we try to do. So it's not transaction by transaction view. It's like, let's build a partnership and see how far we can take you. And the same with Cook Aquaculture, which is, you know, a company certainly before my time at EDC. You know, Cook Aquaculture was a small aquaculture company out in Eastern Canada that was very interested in growing its business. It was like, well, we don't know how much we really want to grow our exports, but working with us over time, they not only grew their exports, but they started setting up operations in Latin America, in Asia, and other jurisdictions. And so they've come to the point where there are multiple markets all over the world with a scale of operation that is, you know, just extraordinary compared to where they started, right? So it's a question of finding those companies who have a vision and really going on that journey with them. And every journey's got bumps in the road, but I think what we're trying to say is we have a lot of risk appetite, and I can prove that by the fact our chief risk officer is sitting in the front row, and he's here to tell everybody how much risk appetite we have. So, you know, to take on some of those difficult things when we see a company who can execute well and really does have a vision for going to the next level in their operations.
So that's actually a great segue into a question about the nature of global trade today and risk that's associated with. I mean, tell us about your perspective on what's changed in global trade that affects Canada and Western Canada in particular.
Well, I mean, I don't have to tell anyone in this room that global trade looks very different now, and it probably will not look the same going forward. But, you know, disruption usually brings opportunities. And I think the reorientation of alliances and partnerships in global trade is a chance for Canada to reevaluate what it's good at and where it has competitive strengths in comparison to other countries. And guess what? All of the things Canada is good at are in this province. Agriculture, energy transition, critical minerals. All of the things that Canada is known for, and we have the potential to be a global superpower at, sit in this province. So in fact, it's your moment. And that's what I think you're seeing, the recognition when you have the Prime Minister and his cabinet sitting in this province, having a discussion and making sure his cabinet understands the value proposition of what is going on in this province. So in some ways, the disruption that's happened, and it's been terrible for people, right? We've seen it in both our results and our dialogue with our partners, right? People are suffering. Exports are down. You know, people who've had a steady business of exports to the U.S. are finding they're getting squeezed out, or they're falling quickly. I mean, one of the things we have is our trade confidence index that we survey regularly. 40% of our exporters who surveyed believe that things are going to keep getting worse, and have already had really tough time. But again, the silver lining: 71% of the exporters we have surveyed are looking at new markets seriously for the first time. So when I think about what Canada at this juncture, what Alberta at this juncture, it's first of all to think about, let's really get serious about the things we're good at, and let's really try to scale them up. And second of all, let's really embrace the fact that there is a world beyond trade with the US, and that we don't have to be just a continental trader. We can be an international trader, that we're moving goods and services, north, east, and west in addition to south. And so it's more what this disruption has given us as an opportunity, and are we here to seize it?
So you've touched upon what I was going to ask about with respect to what your customers are doing to respond to this. I mean, I think about the de minimis rule in the United States, and if you're a small company moving goods on Etsy, but even if you're a big company like Lululemon, and you're caught by the de minimis rules, I mean, what generally are you hearing about how people are responding to these kinds of changes?
Well, it's funny, when we talk to exporters of different kinds, there's this deep creativity that's happening of people trying to, like the tarification, they're calling it, where like, how do if I move this part of my supply chain here and there, like how much can I get my costs down? Like there's a lot of on-the-spot, innovation and agility of trying to move around to sort of reduce the damage of the tariffs. And but it's also, of course, hard to figure out because tariffs in other countries might be also facing things from the US, right? So it's like, okay, well, I have a friend who is the head of a major private label coffee maker, and she gets dinged because the coffee comes from Brazil, and Brazil's now at 50% because the president of the United States doesn't like Brazil at the moment. But then it's being manufactured in Canada, then moved on, and like you're just having to calculate, where is all of this? How do I add up all of these costs? It's an extraordinary logistics effort for people, and I think it's that kind of thing that's actually making people go, okay, so what else can I do with this company? Are there adjacencies of new products that I can create that are a little bit more immune from this? Are there other markets I can go to that are a little bit outside the fray of this tariff war in terms of where they're operating? And, like for example, one of our clients, has a facility in Vietnam, and then it's producing in Vietnam, and the production from Vietnam goes straight into the rest of Asia. So it's like, okay, well, there's no tariff between Vietnam and the rest of Asia, right? So it's like, I'm a Canadian company, this is my facility. But if I want to get around all of this, well, how do I deal with tariff issues? I might just decide, okay, well, what is a pocket of region where I need to have a facility that's just, there's no tariffs in the dynamics of that region, right? And in terms of the US, you might say, well, okay, if I'm going into the US, I might be able to not be able to deal with the de minimis issue, but I might think about, well, what are the value add things that I think, despite the increases, is an attractive product, because I'm slightly changing the offering or the value proposition of what I'm selling to the US, while I take what I was selling into the US and I think, how do I change that to go now to another market, right? Like, it's just, people are being very agile, thinking about how do I deal with this? And frankly, most of them are having negotiations with their US buyers about how much do you take on, how much do I take on, how do we make this work? Because not everybody, including US buyers, can suddenly find, other alternatives themselves, right? So each case seems to be brokered in a different way depending on the sector.
So if you're not able to disclose the name of the company that's set up in Vietnam, it sounds a lot like DandyPack, which is a Vancouver-based company, and you've all seen their products. DandyPack has cashews, has rice crackers. I mean, they've got all kinds of products, and they've set up manufacturing in Vietnam for export. Well, and some of it comes back to Canada, but a large amount of it is for export in the region. And so my question, if DandyPack or some unnamed company wanted to do that, would you be able to finance an operation in Vietnam for a Canadian company?
Yes, that's exactly what one of the things I think I really want to emphasize is what we've been trying to do. If you look at sort of how the government's thinking about this, but also how we've been thinking about this. First of all, EDC has been growing its international representation of offices over the last few years, particularly in the Asia-Pacific, right? So we now have 12 representations in Asia alone, of which one is a fully fledged office in Singapore that does all of our underwriting, does all of its business directly there. So what that means is we have capability to help in market, in local time, Canadian companies who are dealing with setting up their operations, say, in the Indo-Pacific. And equally, we have offices in Latin America, we have offices in Europe, we have been in Mexico for over 20 years, we've been in India for over 20 years, right? So we have significant long-term presence to sort of be able to hold the hands of Canadian companies and not only help them with the financing, but also that guiding of, well, who should you be partnering with here? How should you be thinking about setting up your business channels? How should you think about which areas of this new market you're in you should be prioritizing? So our ability to do that, we continue to get better and better at. Many of those markets we're going into now, we have to work through a guarantee system where we might guarantee a foreign bank, a local bank, to do that lending for us, right? Since we may not be able to do local currency or be able to legally lend in that country. But we are being creative about that, looking at how we can think of new models to support our ability to provide lending. Sometimes we can do that through supporting the Canadian bank and just saying, hey, Canadian bank, give them capital here in Canada so they can use that capital to expand abroad. But sometimes we'll work with a foreign bank who says, can you fund them in that local jurisdiction through a guarantee we give to a local bank in another jurisdiction to support their operations.
So let's go through sort of a hypothetical, and it has to do with this. Like, who identifies what the opportunity is in another marketplace? Is it the business? Is it you working with, the federal trade commissioners? Is it, you and I talked about how you're doing more and more with FCC, Justine over at Farm Credit Corporation. Are you working with with businesses and other agencies of government, and which agencies of government, to help identify what this opportunity is, and then and then slotting in what the responsibility and roles and things that you can do.
Yeah, so it's a bit of all of the above, right? We have a multi-tiered approach. So we have a partnerships group that is making those partnerships both with other crowns, with the banks,
Right.
with associations, with the Trade Commissioner Service, to make sure we're all in sync about what are you doing, what are we doing, based on, by the way, our own high-level economic and international market analysis. If you've ever gone on our website, we have quite a lot of information about international market opportunities. And you can set up your own account as myedc.ca and then get a personalized dashboard of information on market opportunities that you're interested in, markets you're interested in. We have quarterly reports on what's happening in those markets. So sometimes exporters are exploring and they might start there to look for information. Then they might come and they might participate in one of our webinars or seminars in person. And then they might talk to one of our international trade experts who can help them, or they might be just dealing with their local business development manager, of which, you know, in Calgary and elsewhere, you know, Mark Livingston, who I'm sure you all know here, and his team, and come and say, as a company, you know, I'm thinking about trying to get into a new market. I'm thinking of this market. How can you help me with this? And our business development people will connect you into that broader network we have at EDC. Of colleagues and peers who specialize in bringing that data together to help you. But it always involves a partnership with our Trade Commissioner Service colleagues, with our colleagues internationally. And the other thing we do, you know, we do a lot of lending to international business in key markets of interest to Canada. And through our connections to those big international corporates in various markets, we learn a lot about those local countries and those local companies' interests. And we try to match Canadian capabilities to that. So if I'm a good example, the German large grocery chain Lidl, it's the 4th largest in the world. I don't think people realize that. So it is, as a European chain that's actually come increasingly into the US, we've worked very closely to introduce a number of Canadian brands to Lidl. And they have been using those both to put into their distribution chain of their growth in the US market, but also back into Europe. And that's created huge new opportunities for Canadian companies to get into markets because we're showing and introducing them to new buyers. And those buyers are very interested in the novelty of having a new Canadian brand that they wouldn't otherwise have on their shelves, right? So these are the kinds of things we do in key sectors. We have a particular push right now in agri-food products, but we've done that in the past with large industrial corporates who might be looking for environmental technology companies that could help them out with their issues. We've introduced companies in other areas related to, you know, telecom, or related to other enterprise software areas, or related to, you know, very relevant to Alberta, oil and gas technologies, right? This is an incredible market for a lot of niche capabilities that very complex projects that are being run by foreign corporates in other parts of the world need those inputs, and they just may not be aware that Canada has them. So we're doing our best, and again, in partnership with the Team Canada group, to make sure those companies are aware of those international corporates are aware of our capabilities and introduce those as very sort of, let's call it, you know, a concierge service of introductions for those companies who are serious in those markets.
I'm going to go a little off track here, but it's always annoyed me that we send mustard seed from Western Canada, and it goes to France, and it gets processed into Dijon mustard, and we buy it back in little jars. So hypothetically, if I wanted to go buy the Mayo mustard factory in France, and buy it and make it a Canadian company, would you be able to finance that for me?
Yes, we do. We absolutely can. But you better have some equity as part of it, right?
Yeah, well, look, I think based on all the people in this room, I mean, if everybody's prepared to put up $100,000, let's go do that.
Yeah.
So, here's
and we'll put your name on the label, right?
No. Well, I'm going to have to change my name to Antoine if we're going to do that. So, geography is a huge factor in who you do trade with. And so I mean, the United States is a market that we can't walk away from, but we can't count on them entirely either.
That's right.
And so what, like if I were a window manufacturer in Alberta and a lot of my material was being sold in the United States, I mean, I gather from your answer to the previous question that you could finance if I wanted to set up an operation in Texas where I'm selling my windows. But what other strategies are there that you can think of that help us survive our relationship with our biggest trading partner?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, we're very much in dialogue with our clients, and as I said, with the broader Team Canada about what should those strategies look like, right? Part of it is certainly that moving into some markets might require change in your product. You might have different standards, right? If you're suddenly going into the EU, you have European standards now to think about. You may, and you may be able to manage that through, you know, advice and support, as I said, between the Trade Commissioner Service and EDC and others, and make that move. But in terms of investment and thinking about going into other markets, like part of that is an ongoing work we're doing, certainly in partnership with others, where we're trying to help companies evaluate where is maybe a niche or an opportunity somewhere. Part of it, I think, is and we're thinking about this in terms of our ability to scale up Canadian companies, is part of it is creating a greater value of what we do here. So I'll give you an example. This has been on my brain because I learned this through my son, who's an architect. You know, Canadian building in mass timber generally imports the lumber from cross-laminated timber from Austria. It doesn't come from Canada. And you know why? Because Austria has manufactured the perfection, the ability to operate at scale with very competitive prices. Cross-laminated timber, even though you know, we have all the capability of doing that. None of our cross-laminated timber producers are at scale yet. And now they're just starting to get to scale. And by the way, as they're doing that, Europeans are coming in and buying them up. So we have to sit there and think, okay, how do we take those companies who truly are serious at wanting to scale, and we help you grow, and we help you outgrow the limitations of you only being able to service bits and pieces of this market, or maybe a little bit into the US? How do you get really competitive? Because, you know, there is no reason we couldn't be selling CLT back to Europe, right? Or into other markets. And by the way, other products that come out of, like, for example, wood insulation, which is a very, very interesting new way of insulation from a green perspective that the Europeans are deeply interested in. We don't produce it. And yet that is a byproduct that we could be doing, right? So a lot of this is taking the basis of what we do and orienting, say, how do we create a new product here that's a fit for another market that has a different set of preferences than what we have done historically because we've been only going to the US. Some of this does take CapEx, and that's where we're interested in saying, okay, what does it take for you to pivot your business? Mm-hmm. And do you have the ambition to do it, in which case we're there to help you? Or part of it might be that, you know, you need help in that market exploration, right? Like, would this be viable if we thought about you moving into this new market area? And again, I think that's where that conversation is happening, where, you know, both with industry associations here in Canada, our work working with individual companies, our work with the broader Trade Commissioner Service, how do we do a deeper dive into these markets and really see, like, where's the connection that we haven't thought of before of a new product that really we've got all the basic materials to create. We just haven't because we've been doing the automatic relationship with the US, which looks just like our market, and therefore we ship windows that look just like this, right?
So we've had Jean Charest sitting in your seat before, and Jean recently talked about how 20 years from now we might be thanking Donald Trump for
I've heard that
what he's done. So let me ask you this question. I mean, in your observation, are Canadian companies getting more ambitious because of that? Has there been too much sort of being comfortable with the relationship with the United States being where we do business? Are Canadians amping up their ambitions to be world beaters in exports?
I think there's always been quiet successes in this country. and not many people know about them. I mean, your province is a key example, right? You have world leaders in some of these niche areas of the oil and gas value chain that nobody knows about, but actually are all over the world. Steve and I, were doing meetings the other day in Edmonton, and it's like, you're talking to some company, and it says, oh, and, are you exporting? Yeah, like I export to 50 countries. What? You export to 50 countries already? You're in Africa, you're in Europe, you're this or that. Like, there's a lot of quiet successes. And so I think we fully have the capability to take what we do and what we already have as champions and amp them up. But I do think some of our key sectors, like agriculture, are not at scale enough. And it's two things, right? One of it is infrastructure. We can't move. If it's agriculture, we need better infrastructure to move product, right? Faster, through ports, better rail. And that's something you're hearing the Prime Minister talk about. And that's where I think you as citizens and all of us have to keep the government accountable to say, how fast are we going to deliver on this to be able to truly scale up? Because, scaling up and trading, and I said this to the minister in my own direct discussions, like, it's great, minister, to diversify, but if you can't move the product, you can't diversify, right? So to the extent that you have physical product, you absolutely have to have all of that enabling infrastructure to do it, right? I can't seem to get this microphone right. The other thing that you have to do is you have to think about, I think, what are the pieces where you want to focus, both as, I want to be careful not to say industrial policy, but to really understand as a country or as a province what you're good at. And try to make hard choices. Like, you can't.
Are we good at making electric vehicle batteries?
Well, that's not for me to answer.
Okay, just thought I'd ask.
But I think you guys know what you're good at.
Yeah.
I think we do know what we're good at. And by the way, the other piece is I don't think we celebrate the successes we have. And so our image abroad is not as clear as it could be about how good we are. Because a lot of the successes, by the way, that Canadian companies have, people assume it's an American company, often. And particularly often because it might be really strong and then just at the last minute bought by an American company and then gets subsumed. But in fact, all that capability and know-how stays in Canada and continues to be like an industrial cluster strength here, right? So we have a communication, we have an image problem, we have a narrative problem. But I also think we have a problem in judging where we want to make bets. And I think it would be good for us to be a little bit more confident about leaning into where we want to make bets that really reflect our capabilities. And I think success is infectious, right? Like, once you get one or two high-profile wins, people start getting like, oh, like things are happening in Canada. Like, if somebody else could do that, I can do that too, right? I think that's really, like, we're on the cusp, I feel like, always on the cusp of something meaningfully changing. But we just got to tip it over just to get that momentum going, right? And that takes both a confidence and an enthusiasm. And I'll tell you, the world's watching us. I mean, I've had discussions with companies in Asia and companies in Europe, and they're like, you've got all of these basic strengths as a country. Like, we want to work with you. We want to find, like, there's a lot of potential here. And especially now, as the US looks less and less like a place of stable rules and business. Like, explain to us, Canada, how you're going to change how you operate so we can be partners with you in a reliable, measurable, working at the speed of business way. So again, it comes back to, I think, our government to show us, and all of us to realize, like, with our regulations, with our ability to come together, we need to move faster to be at the speed of business. And if we can show and demonstrate things will happen, the world's watching, and it's going to take interest, and it's going to start showing up more on our doors to say, what can we do here with you?
Your response to that makes me think of a couple of things. One, I want to talk about infrastructure. Two, we don't embrace what we're good at. If you look at the Netherlands, they are proud to be an agricultural nation, and they're an agricultural superpower. They embrace it. Norway, they embrace that they are great producers of energy, including hydrocarbons. And we don't embrace these things. and we sometimes chase shiny objects that are outside of what our core competencies are in Canada, which is that we grow things, we mine things, and we provide energy for things. Those three things are core to the opportunities for Canada, in my view. But let me go back to infrastructure. Some people have talked about, the desire to build, baby, build. But it really should be sell, baby, sell. Because to your point, if you can't move it, you can't sell it. And exports make up 2/3 of our GDP. And if you can't get it to market, then you can't sell it. You're not improving your GDP, your
Right.
economic opportunity. And you and I talked about this beforehand, that foreign policy is about expressions of both interests and values, both. And in the last 10 years, there's been lots of expressions of values, but not much expression of interests.
Right.
But to do what you want to do, you have to do what you have to do, which is that you have to have fiscal capacity that you build through your economy, so that if you want to help allies in Ukraine, you can do that.
Right.
But you can't do the latter unless you get your economic.
Fiscal.
So that's a long way of getting to this question. I mean, and this is actually a question that came from the audience, do you get involved, or does EDC have a role in supporting investment in trade-enabling infrastructure, whether it's ports, rail, digital corridors? Are you engaged in that area?
So we are very much in conversations with the government about what our role should be there. As I said, given that we have such a large project finance capability, and it's just largely been used for international support up to now, right, in support of Canadian companies going abroad, working on infrastructure. The fact that we now have an inward focus on building our own enabling, yes, we will be involved. How we'll be involved? I think we've already, by the way, been involved in areas of critical minerals. Many of you may know that Torngat mining company, which is based in Quebec, there was an announcement about that. We led that deal. It's a pre-FID, so it's a very high risk financial investment decision deal that we did. We led, and we brought Canada Infrastructure Bank in because we are leaders in know-how of how to do a project finance in mining, because we've been doing it for decades outside in other jurisdictions. So we are providing the government with a lot of thought leadership about how to develop the critical mineral industry in Canada now. So that's a piece we're very much involved in. I think on the trade enabling related to ports and things, there's a certain amount of that we will absolutely get involved in. I mean, one of my big excitements, I think, that I'm looking at, and again, it's like, it's really, really an exciting moment for you as Alberta. You've got the Major Projects Office here. You've got one of the most extraordinary leaders leading that, who understands well your industry, who knows how to get things done, in Don Farrell. So that will be a dialogue important for us to understand. How do we partner with the Major Projects Office and understand what pieces should we do, what piece should Canada Infrastructure Bank, how do we use our capability to bring international capital in, which we do all the time, because global export credit agencies who work with us everywhere and work with the international banks say, oh yeah, if EDC's there, we know it's a good project, we'll be there too, right? So there's an ability to catalyze and convene international capital and bank capital that we can do by being involved in certain projects, but it'll only be some. It's going to be a lot of activity. Then we obviously, some things might be more relevant for other players than us, but absolutely we'll be involved.
I'm going to give a bit of an advert for an event that you're sponsoring, and we're going to have your chairman speaking at it, and that's our event on the 24th with the Nordic ambassadors. So Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark make up about 0.3% of the world's population. They produce more than 1% of the world's GDP. And if you think about the companies that come from there, the world's largest toy maker, Lego, the world's largest furniture seller, IKEA, because they sell Swedish meatballs, they're also the 6th largest restaurant chain in the world. You think about Maersk, the shipping companies, the shipbuilders, the cruise lines. You think about Novo Nordisk, one of the biggest pharma companies in the world. I think about Nokia, which started off being in the business, it's named after the Nokia forest, because all they were was a lumber company, and you know, and they morphed into something remarkable. You think about Ericsson.
Yeah.
So my question for you is this: I mean, how do these? What can we learn from the experience of other jurisdictions in terms of how we create, form capital, grow, and retain them in those countries where probably 80% of their revenues come from outside of their own country?
Right.
Oh, I forgot Saab. That's the other one.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
country the size of Sweden makes its own fighter jets. That's pretty extraordinary. But
Yeah.
what can we learn from other countries that EDC has sort of figured out?
You know, it's interesting. I think there's a lot. I mean, we certainly, on the International Export Credit Agency, we have a lot of dialogue with them because we do see synergies. And I would tell you, internationally, EDC is considered, as an export credit agency, one of the most innovative in how we support our companies going abroad, because we have to, right? We have a very interesting mix of mostly mid-sized exporters. We don't have the luxury of a few big companies that we can back and say, as an export credit agency, you know, 80% of my business is backing this one company, as many of these Nordic countries do. So we've had to be more innovative about how do we push more mid-market companies out, how do we do things differently to get, you know, a multi-pronged approach. So it is different. Like, it's actually easier when you have one large winner in your country to just push it out. And I think, you know, to a certain extent in earlier eras we had that. Like, there was an era of time for EDC when we just did huge amounts for Nortel, for example, right? Or we did, you know, as we have in the past, huge amounts for a Bombardier. But I think the economy, as it's developed in Canada, is different now, because we do have some amazing large companies like a Shopify. They're just in a new industry, right? And I don't think there's anything wrong with us having more mid-sized, highly competitive, agile companies that move into different markets. But that doesn't mean we don't and shouldn't be thinking like the Nordics of how do we take the few best ones and really try to scale them, but scale them in the areas of where we see future growth, right? And the economies keep changing and redefining what is. I mean, one of the things that I think we look at our trade statistics, we got to remember is there's a whole, like, we talk largely about exports of goods, but there's a whole export of services that's not well understood, of which we're really good at, including digital services. It's a quiet strength of Canada. Canada also has a very strong constituency of foreign affiliate sales. So sales by international operations of foreign-owned companies. Those all contribute back to our GDP, right? But they don't stand out as well in terms of the numbers and the understanding of that success. So I think there's things we can learn. I'm hoping that we pick a few bets and we have our own areas of strength going forward as the Nordic countries have. And I think we need to work closer with them because we are really philosophically and culturally very aligned with them. But I also think in some ways the depth of the broad-based mid-market entrepreneurialism we have across various areas is stronger than what they have. And I think that's something to remember too. Because again, it's sort of under the radar. But we're very strong in a number of areas, including emerging areas, right? We're actually, you know, just to remind everyone, there's 4 countries in the world that have the ability to have an independent large language model company. Canada's one of them. You have in China, you have in the US, you have Mistral in France, and you have Cohere in Canada. We are the only non-superpower outside of France who has a company that has the depth to have created a large language model because we're world-class in AI. That means something, right? As we do in growing areas of other areas of emerging technology like quantum. We're actually one of the world leaders in quantum, and frankly, in most of that quantum capability outside of Quebec is in Western Canada.
Do you think people in Ottawa know that?
Well, they're learning fast.
Well, I'm
They're
happy to
learning
hear
fast.
that. Look, we've had a wonderful conversation, but I'm going to ask a question from Mr. Cranky Pants here in the audience. Mr. Cranky Pants says, punitive legislation and regulation really grinds us in the West. And there are some real doozies on the books at the moment. Does Ottawa have a tin ear? What role can or does Crown corporations like yours help in educating on those pieces of legislation that are inhibiting growth, opportunity, and investment? And you and I talked about this earlier about, who's going to put money, who's going to put a multi-billion-dollar bet on a pipeline if you've got a tanker ban off the coast of British Columbia and an emissions cap on production of energy.
Right.
So, I mean, do you get the sense that people are in Ottawa listening to the Crown corporations about the very sometimes legitimate feedback of people here in Western Canada?
So I think they are. I think it's very meaningful that you had the cabinet in Edmonton. That's very meaningful, right? That's an education. That was a school outing trip, and everybody was there to learn. So I think politically that activity is going on. I think that making sure at the civil service level in Ottawa that understanding is there needs to continue. We, as a Crown corporation, our job is to reflect the voice and interests of the current companies we deal with, right? We are there to make sure, as being one step closer to the market than civil service and government departments are, to reflect what we are hearing from our clients. So we absolutely play that role in making sure that we convey those concerns and interests, including on regulation. And, without speaking too out of turn, there's certainly, I take whatever moment I can where I'm with deputy ministers to convey my own frustration of those regulations and concerns that really have to be thought through. But what I keep saying is you cannot enough keep pushing this point, right? Keep pushing this point with everybody, because I think half of it is just lack of awareness of at Ottawa. If you're sitting in the government and you think as an environmental assessment department, your job is to think of as many things as you can to question in a project, because that's your definition of success, well then you have a problem, right? Because their definition of success as a department is different than the definition of success of the department that wants the project approved, right? And this is where you get this chaos, right? How do we define accountability and output? And are we mixing process with outcomes? So, this is where you cannot be clear enough. Every chance you get in your engagement as businesses, as public policy, to influence and make that clear, accountability. And we have a moment in time, and it needs to happen now. So I feel like at the political level, we have that understanding. But how quickly that gets pushed through the government, we feel it as a Crown, I can tell you. We feel it, and we are so in sync with business and wanting to move at that speed. But it does take a village. We all have to come together. And so I think just keeping that message up is really critical.
I have another question that came in my text here. I think it's a pretty good question. How do we go from being an exporter of raw materials to finished products? Or should we stay as we are?
No, I don't think we should stay as we are at all. It's like a huge waste. So much of the value, right? Why is it, like, I see exports, we see that, like, wheat, it goes across the border, gets milled, or edible proteins made come back. Like, why aren't we doing this, right? And so that's where we're starting to talk with our Crown peers, like you mentioned Farm Credit Corp, and say, okay, what's the next value add chain in canola industry we can do? We can build plants and grow the value proposition here. What's the next one in, as I said, the wood industry? Why aren't we creating more value add products that we're shipping out as opposed to raw materials that are going to be milled and produced into something south of the border then coming back? I absolutely think that's important. I think the problem has been, it's been pretty easy up to now just shipping raw material. And I have certainly heard from exporters that, it's just really hard to go to that next level. It's hard enough to do anything in Canada. So why would I take on the extra risk of building this plant and trying to go to that next level of value? So again, it comes back to, we just need to be pulling together to say, no, actually this next level, we need to work to make sure that value processing is happening here. And so you're going to see us trying to do more of that with companies, but we are trying to find those companies who say, this is my base. I really want to go to that next level because it is tough. You have to be tenacious, and you have to be sort of ready to work on a longer term plan to move to that next level of value add processing. And some people are okay with that, and some people aren't. And some people say, I'd love to do that, but I can't find the labor, or I can't find the, or I can't find the capital, I can't find the equity. So, there are genuine reasons and hurdles. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but it is a discussion we're open and prepared to have with anybody who's got that ambition.
Yeah, I'll make this observation. The people that I talk to that deal with EDC would relate to your comment that EDC operates at the speed of business, but governments don't. Governments operate, not with stopwatches, but with, their progress is measured in geologic time zones. But so, look, I really think that you've touched on something that is different between being a crown corporation that's responsive to your clients versus how a government might operate, and so I applaud that. Do you get the sense, though, that the political agenda of the Prime Minister will compel the federal bureaucracies to be able to move closer to the speed of business? And maybe the second question on that you touched on is that the bureaucrats are so focused on process, they think the process is the outcome.
Yeah.
That's not the outcome.
Right.
I think that the Prime Minister's office in the last 10 years, they thought that issuing a press release was the outcome.
Yeah.
It's not. So do you think that the current Prime Minister is instructing people appropriately that we need action? It's not just process, it's not just press releases.
Yeah. Well, as you know, as a Crown, we have to be scrupulously neutral in all this, right? So I'm certainly not a political commentator, and nor will I ever want to be. I think we're quite happy staying in our world of working with businesses. But I will say in our dealings from our experience is it's been very constructive.
Good. And
it's been very clear that the status quo is being shaken up. So I think we feel encouraged that things are trending in the right direction. I just think it's a matter of a race against time, right, to get things changed and moving. And I think, like I said, maybe going back to the fact that you have the major projects office here, that's a signal that you're trying to create a new pathway for how things get approved and move forward. So that is a way of saying, well, while we're fixing the bigger system, here's this other shortcut we're using to get some things done. And I think that's a really positive trend, because the innovation that will happen in that office of how we move forward will be a lesson for how it gets extended to the rest of all those projects out there.
Here's another question that came from the audience, and this was submitted by email in anticipation of this. What are the most effective federal actions and things that provincial leaders can do to take in other markets with foreign leaders to help exporters grow markets for Western Canadian products? For example, are trade missions effective, or are there better approaches?
I think trade missions have a role, as do leaders, in being in markets and talking actively about what we're good at. So there's just bringing visibility to the top, in any country with leader-to-leader discussions is really important, right? And trade ministers who go around and act as, the advocate and, chief salesperson for Canadian companies is really important. There just is a sense of confidence. One of the things that we've said, and we've certainly discovered, is that when we back something, a foreign country will say, well, that's really good. I hear that it's got a Canadian government bank backing it. So it's an endorsement, right? It's an endorsement. This is an important company for Canada. And therefore, it's got more trust that being in this market, it's got this sort of seal of approval from the government of Canada as a good company that should be out there and doing business with the rest of the world. So there is a representation role that trade ministers, that leaders make, that EDC does in being that Team Canada endorsement that I think is important. So there's a certain role for that, all of that, and trade missions as well. I think what you have to do is create the underlying machinery between those trade missions of how do you follow up? How do you keep a steady stream of engagement so that, you know, there are subsequent meetings that you're bringing customers, potential customers from foreign markets and Canadian suppliers together again, right? And that's the kind of work we try to do in our connections program with our international borrowers, right? And we do that, as I said, in partnership with others. So it's like you can set the tone with missions, but you got to do the follow-up.
So because I'm the moderator here, I get the opportunity to throw out questions that are of personal interest to me. And I always ask people, what do you recommend for a podcast or a book? I mean, what should I be reading? What should potential exporters be reading that would be valuable, that you've read recently? I mean, what would you recommend?
I don't like to actually think what I would recommend ever to you, Gary. You're probably so better read than I am. That's an intimidating thing. But podcasts. So I have a fairly eclectic taste in podcasts. I like to listen to things that are outside the jurisdictions of Canada to make sure I have perspectives. So I often listen to the Financial Times of London's economics podcast. You know what I love that you guys have locally is ARC Energy Ideas. I love to listen to that podcast. I think the world of Jackie and Peter and that dialogue about like what's really going on in the energy industry. So I'm very plugged in listening to that. I also like to listen to, I don't know if you've seen The Rest is Politics, The Rest is History series of discussions about politics in the UK, Rest of Politics US. I mean, those are just utterly fascinating, although I can only take so much because sometimes it makes no sense to sort of the antics going on. But I think in terms of reading, I think it's important to understand whenever we're in a moment, there's always historical context, and so it's good to read history, but it's also good to read about communication. One of the books I had read recently that just about communication at a time when people are just so divisive is David Brooks's How to Know a Person. Like a book about how do you talk to people who are so different than you? How do you communicate across a gap? How do you show interest, genuine interest at the personal level in somebody that you can bridge that gap and be able to have a conversation? I think civil discourse is so critical at this point that some of those lessons in reading a book like that to remember, like whatever happens in the world, we have to keep civil discourse. We have to know how to talk to people at very different parts of the world than us, very different political stripes. And I really, really hope in Canada we can continue to do that. I don't think we want to see ourselves quite as divided as we've seen north-south of the border. And so, you know, books like that remind me of that. There's just, you know, everybody's got a valued perspective. You just got to understand where that person's coming from and try to pull out that context to have a better sense of how you communicate with somebody who comes from a very different perspective. So that's the kind of things I've been spending more time reading about.
So based on all the experience that you've had with dealing with customers, EDC's customers across the country, last question, are you optimistic or are you pessimistic about the future of Canada?
You can't be in this job with your pessimistic. Of course I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because, like, you know, just sort of talking to my parents, my grandparents, all of that. Think of the history of Canada. Canada, after the war, had one of the largest navies in the world. It was the industrial base for most of the Allied defense industry, right? We actually have been through these things. We just don't remember because our grandparents or our parents haven't reminded us of those stories. Like this isn't new what we're going through. We have reinvented ourselves in the past, and we will again. And that's what gives me comfort. And it always gives me comfort to talk to younger people. When I talk to my kids, when I talk to, you know, people much younger than my kids, and I see the innovation. When we were in Edmonton, and I see the incredible innovation. As I said, the MacGyver factor. There's nothing that anybody can't make in Edmonton. I mean, they're just extraordinary engineers, right? That absolute ability just to sort of take a concept and run with it, that gives me huge confidence in this country. I think our biggest issue is getting in our own way of like our own attitude. Like we are fully capable, and we're fully capable of embracing that we're just a different kind of country. We're a middle power. We have values, but we're extraordinarily, able, I think, innovative and industrious when we want to be. And I think this is the time we want to be. So, I'm very confident we can move forward. But it doesn't mean that it's not on all of us to keep finding those ways, as we said, to keep our leaders accountable and to think about how do we, remove those barriers, those regulations, those things that are slowing us down.
I share your optimism. And I always say this, that pessimists are often right. Optimists are often wrong. But if anything good happens in the world, it's because an optimist tried to make a difference. Right. Alison Nankivell, I thank you for joining us here today, and I hope all of you enjoyed today's event. And we're happy always, as a not-for-profit organization, to accept your generous donations to our work. And many of you who are in the room have done exactly that. But I thank you all very, very much for coming out today, and good luck to you. And
well, thank you.
Look forward to doing more things with you in the future.
Absolutely, it's a partnership.
Thank you all.